bad animosity was hanging around between the couples, the ex-couples, as it were. I mean,
band have never for one moment mentioned the word breaking up, but from time to time I think people have, created stories about the band breaking up, or it must be breaking up now.
Well, like Lindsay said, at the whole, and Stevie, all of us are just overjoyed at this lovely lady's return.
Sausalito, California, 1976. The air inside the record plant is thick with stale cigarette smoke, spilled liquor, and a suffocating, heavy silence. The room is windowless, draped in dark wood, feeling more like a submarine bunker than a musical sanctuary. Lindsey Buckingham sits hunched over a massive, intimidating mixing desk, his eyes burning holes across the dimly lit room. Staring back at him, wrapped in dark shawls and quiet fury, is Stevie Nicks. They are about to press record. They are about to lay down the tracks for an album that will define an entire generation. But as the heavy 2-inch magnetic reel-to-reel tape begins to spin, neither of them quite realizes that the music they are making in the dark is the very thing that will fracture their souls forever. He didn't know it yet, and she wouldn't admit it, but that late-night recording session would be the beginning of a 40-year war. And this was a band drowning in its own staggering success, completely consumed by forbidden romances, drug-fueled paranoia, and shattered vows. The magic they were capturing on that spinning tape was built entirely on an emotional graveyard. John and Christine McVie, married for 8 years, were refusing to speak to each other outside of the vocal booth. Mick Fleetwood, the towering anchor of the group, was quietly watching his own marriage disintegrate into a public, humiliating wreckage. And then there were Lindsay and Stevie, the golden couple of California rock and roll, tearing each other to pieces with every chord struck and every word sung. They weren't just writing songs in that room, they were weaponizing them. To understand the sheer, blinding intensity of this moment, to understand the blood on the tracks in Sausalito, you have to rewind the tape. You have to cross the Atlantic Ocean and go back to London. 1967. Fleetwood Mac did not start as a glittering, sun-drenched pop behemoth. They started out as a gritty, purist British blues band, led by the brilliant but deeply troubled guitarist Peter Green.
Need someone's hand to lead me.
Mick Fleetwood and John McVie were the rhythm section, the engine room. They were working-class musicians who believed in the sorrow and the sweat of the Chicago blues. But Fleetwood Mac was a band born under a strange, persistent, and terrifying curse. Peter Green, their fearless leader and the soul of the band, took a massive dose of acid at a commune in Munich, Germany, and effectively never came back. As Mick Fleetwood later recalled in his autobiography, they watched their friend walk into a house in the German woods, and the man who walked out was a stranger.
Peter took some more drugs and for sure never really came back from that, to our recollection, and John is to this day absolutely furious with these people.
His mind had splintered. He walked away from the band, began giving away all of his money, completely lost to the absolute void of 1960s psychedelic casualties. Then came Jeremy Spencer, another guitarist who stepped out of a hotel in Los Angeles one afternoon to buy a magazine and vanished, only to be found days later having shaved his head and joined a religious cult. Then came Danny Kerwin, who spiraled into severe alcoholism, smashed his head through a dressing room wall, refused to walk on stage for a gig, and was fired. By 1974, Mick Fleetwood was a desperate man. He was the captain of a ghost ship, steering a vessel that seemed determined to sink. He had relocated the remnants of the band to Los Angeles, California, chasing a dream that seemed to be actively running away from him. He was standing in Sound City Studios in the San Fernando Valley, looking for a cheap, reliable studio to record in, when a producer named Keith Olsen played him a tape just to demonstrate the power of the soundboard. The song playing through the massive studio monitors was called Frozen Love. The guitar work was blistering, aggressive, and fiercely intricate. Mick's ears perked up. He asked the producer who was playing that guitar. The producer pointed down the hall. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks were high school sweethearts from Northern California. They had moved to Los Angeles with stars in their eyes, signed a record deal, released an album called Buckingham Nicks. And watched it completely devastatingly bomb. Their record label abruptly dropped them. They were utterly, miserably broke. Lindsey was sitting in their cramped apartment, obsessively practicing his guitar all day and night, while Stevie was cleaning houses and waiting tables at a Bob's Big Boy restaurant just to pay the rent. She was coming home exhausted, smelling of deep fryer grease, while he was perfecting his finger-picking style. The resentment was already planting its roots. The fairy tale was dying a slow, miserable death. When Mick Fleetwood called Lindsey Buckingham and asked him to join Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey laid down an ultimatum that would alter the course of music history forever. He said, "She comes with me. We are a package deal. You take both of us, or you take neither of us." Mick agreed. And just like that, the final explosive ingredients were added to the cauldron. Their first album together, the White Fleetwood Mac album released in 1975, was a massive, entirely unexpected smash hit. It climbed the Billboard charts slowly, steadily, until it hit number 1. Suddenly, almost overnight, they went from struggling, starving musicians to multimillionaires. They bought sprawling mansions in the Hollywood Hills. They bought fleets of luxury cars. But, as anyone who has survived immense fame will tell you, sudden, unimaginable wealth does not fix your existing problems. It acts as an accelerant. It takes every tiny crack in your foundation, fills it with rocket fuel, and splits it wide open. Which brings us back to the windowless bunker in Sausalito. 1976. The studio they booked, the record plant, was supposed to be a retreat, a place to get away from the blinding, sycophantic glare of Los Angeles and focus purely on the follow-up album. Instead, it became a psychological prison. The band moved into separate houses nearby, but the studio was where they lived, breathed, and bled. Christine McVie later recalled in interviews from that era that the atmosphere was exactly like a cocktail party where everyone was secretly hoping the house would burn down. They were, in her own words, trapped in a highly emotional state, drinking heavily, and fueled by massive, unrelenting quantities of cocaine.
I used to carry a gram of cocaine in my boot at all times.
It wasn't hidden. Velvet bags of the white powder were kept openly under the mixing desk. It was the absolute unrepentant height of 1970s excess. The drugs kept them awake, kept them working 20-hour shifts, but it also completely stripped away their empathy. It turned them into raw, exposed nerves incapable of basic human grace. Imagine the sheer claustrophobic psychological torture of that room. John and Christine McVie were at the absolute end of the line. John was a quiet, introverted man, but when he drank, a dark, heavy, and vicious melancholy settled over him. Christine, the steady, grounding presence of the band, the older sister figure who always poured the tea and kept the peace, had finally snapped. She could no longer bear the isolation of being married to a man who was lost in the bottom of a liquor bottle. She demanded a legal separation, but they couldn't leave the band. They had an ironclad contract. They had an album to make. So they established a brutal, heartbreaking rule of engagement. They would only speak to each other when discussing the music. If it wasn't about a chord change, a tempo adjustment, or a bass line, there was only silence. Crushing, deafening, heavy silence. They would sit on opposite sides of the mixing console, staring at the floor, waiting for the engineer to hit the button. And then Christine did something that was both incredibly liberating for her and ruthlessly cruel to him. she found comfort in the arms of the band's lighting director, a man named Curry Grant. She fell into a passionate, undeniable romance right in front of her estranged husband's eyes. And because she was a brilliant, instinctual songwriter, she wrote about it. She sat at the grand piano in the middle of the studio and wrote a joyful, bouncing, infectious song called You Make Loving Fun. It was an unapologetic love letter to her new romance. Now, think about the sheer, suffocating weight of what happened next. She brought that song into the studio. John McVie, the man whose heart was currently being trampled into the dust, the man who still loved her deeply, had to pick up his bass guitar and play the rhythmic foundation to a song his wife wrote about sleeping with another man. For years, John convinced himself the song was about her dog. He literally had to lie to his own brain. As he later admitted to journalists, it was the only psychological way he could survive playing those notes. That is the level of profound, desperate denial operating in that room. But as incredibly tense as the McVie situation was, it was merely a quiet, smoldering fire compared to the absolute thermonuclear war happening between Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. Their relationship had been deteriorating for years, slowly crumbling under the weight of poverty, unfulfilled ambitions, and deep-seated jealousies. But fame was the final nail in the coffin. Stevie, with her ethereal, raspy voice, her velvet top hats, her flowing chiffon shawls, and her mystical, witchy aura, had become the undeniable focal point of the band. The crowd screamed for her. The music press fawned over her. She was on the covers of magazines. Lindsey, who was the true musical architect of the band's sound, the obsessive studio genius who arranged every complex harmony and layered every single acoustic guitar track, felt totally sidelined. His ego was profoundly bruised and his heart was broken. When Stevie finally ended the relationship, officially moving her things out of their shared house, Lindsey was completely untethered. He was furious, he was deeply, painfully wounded, and he wanted her to bleed just as much as he was bleeding. So he took the only weapon he had left, his guitar and his pen. He wrote a song called Go Your Own Way. It is perhaps the most famous, blistering breakup song in the history of recorded music. On the surface, it is an upbeat, driving, radio-friendly rock anthem. But listen closely to the lyrics. It is a vicious, unyielding, personal attack. He wrote the line, "Packing up, shacking up is all you want to do." When Stevie heard that line through the studio monitors, she was completely livid. She cornered him in the studio, her voice trembling with rage, and demanded he take it out. She told him it was a total fabrication, that she was not just running around sleeping with people, that it was a deeply cruel and unfair portrayal of their deeply complicated history. As she later recounted in her memoir, she begged him, almost in tears, to strike those specific words from the record. She knew the entire world was going to hear it.
She rules her life like a bird in flight, and who will be her?
Lindsey looked at her, his eyes cold, distant, and unwavering, and said, "No, I wrote it. It is my truth, and it is staying in." And then came the ultimate unforgivable cruelty. Because Fleetwood Mac's signature sound relied heavily on tight, three-part vocal harmonies, Stevie Nicks had to stand up to the microphone night after agonizing night in the studio and sing the backing vocals to a song telling the entire world that she was nothing but a promiscuous, heartless woman. She had to perfectly harmonize with the man who was actively, deliberately destroying her reputation on tape. It was an ego-driven blood sport, played out over millions of dollars of state-of-the-art studio equipment. Every single time she sang that chorus, you can almost feel her glaring at him through the thick double glass of the vocal booth. The engineers remembered the air turning ice cold whenever they had to do a vocal take together. But Stevie Nicks was not a passive victim in this war. She had her own pen, she had her own truth, and she had a profound sense of musical vengeance. While Lindsay was obsessively tweaking guitar knobs and commanding the mixing board like a dictatorial general, Stevie felt completely suffocated. The tension in the main control room was unbearable, a physical weight on her chest. She needed an escape. The record plant was a sprawling, eccentric, maze-like complex. And deep within its walls was a secret, hidden studio that had originally been built for the funk legend Sly Stone. It was a bizarre, sunken room lined completely in black and deep red velvet, featuring a massive, sunken, circular bed right in the center of the floor. Stevie retreated to this velvet cave. It was completely silent. She brought a small, cheap electric keyboard and a primitive ticking drum machine. She sat on that giant bed, surrounded by the heavy, silent dark, and she hit a simple, monotonous beat on the drum machine. She started to play two simple chords over and over again: F major, G major, F major, G major, and out of the ether, out of the sheer heartbreak, the exhaustion, and the bitter resentment of the past year, the words poured out of her like a flood. Thunder only happens when it is raining. Players only love you when they are playing. Women, they will come and they will go. When the rain washes you clean, you will know. She wrote Dreams in about 10 minutes. It was a singular moment of divine inspiration. It was the ultimate ethereal counterstrike to Lindsay's furious go your own way. Where Lindsay was angry, loud, and aggressive, Stevie was haunting, prophetic, and completely, terrifyingly composed. She was telling him, "You can yell all you want, but you will eventually realize what you lost. When the anger fades, you will be alone with your memories." She recorded a rough cassette tape of the song, walked back down the hallway into the main studio, and handed the tape to Lindsay. He put it in the tape deck and hit play without saying a word. Imagine being Lindsay Buckingham in that exact moment. You are listening to your ex-girlfriend, the woman who just left you, deliver a mystical, chilling prophecy about your own future loneliness. And, deep in your musical bones, that the song is an absolute, undeniable masterpiece. It is better than anything you have written all month. Despite all the venom, despite the screaming matches, the shattered dinner plates, and the endless, exhausting hostility that permeated every single interaction, Lindsay Buckingham was, above all else, a dedicated musician. He knew a hit when he heard one. He took Stevie's simple two-chord demo and he built a towering sonic cathedral around it. He layered the acoustic guitars with infinite patience. He crafted the brilliant, subtle bass lines with John, and he created the rhythmic, hypnotic heartbeat of the song. He hated her on a personal level, but he produced her masterpiece. That was the tragic, twisted, entirely unique magic of Fleetwood Mac. The art was always, always more important than the artist's sanity. But what about Mick Fleetwood, the man who brought them all together in the first place? The towering 6'5" drummer who was supposed to be the father figure, the steady hand on the steering wheel, the peacemaker. Mick was entirely, comprehensively falling apart. His wife, Jenny Boyd, the mother of his children, had been having a blatant affair with a former member of the band, Bob Weston. It was a betrayal that shattered Mick to his very core. He was the one holding the weeping, screaming members of his current band together, acting as a makeshift therapist, referee, and warden, while his own personal life was nothing but a smoking, devastated crater. He was absolutely terrified that if the band stopped working, if they took even a week off to breathe, the entire fragile ecosystem would collapse. And if the album failed, he would have absolutely nothing left in the world. He would be entirely, totally alone. So he poured gasoline on the fire. He kept the studio booked indefinitely. He kept the champagne flowing like water. He ordered more cocaine whenever the energy dipped. Ken Kea, one of the primary audio engineers for the album, recounted in his book how Mick would walk in tall and imposing.
So that was really how I got started working with Fleetwood Mac. they gave me the opportunity of making the best sound on every instrument, making it sound as good as possible.
And just declare that the party was continuing. They were completely, deeply numb to the devastation happening around them. They were running purely on adrenaline, chemical stimulants, and deep-seated fear. They were willingly sacrificing their sanity, their romantic relationships, and their basic fundamental humanity, all to keep the massive corporate machine moving forward. And in the darkest, most confusing hours of those grueling, endless sessions, the boundaries blurred even further. Mick, desperate for any shred of comfort, and Stevie, seeking an escape from the relentless, suffocating tension with Lindsay, fell into a brief, highly secretive, and incredibly destructive affair. It was the ultimate betrayal within a family that was already tearing itself limb from limb. It was incestuous, confusing, and doomed from the very first second. When Lindsay eventually found out about it, the anger in the room escalated from merely toxic to practically lethal. The studio became a vacuum where the concept of reality warped and snapped. Daylight ceased to exist in their world. They worked from late evening, rolling in around 7 or 8 at night, and worked until the sun rose brilliantly over the San Francisco Bay, completely out of sync with the rest of humanity. They were creating a polished, mathematically perfect sound out of a chaotic, bleeding, emotional mess. They recorded for 31 weeks. In the 1970s, music industry, that was an absolute eternity. The record label, executives at Warner Brothers were panicking. They were pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into a project that seemed to have no actual end date. The engineers were exhausted to the point of collapse. Ken Kylot remembered how the band members would literally record their parts in completely separate rooms just to avoid looking at each other's faces. They couldn't even stand to share the same air. The engineers had to splice the heavy magnetic tape together endlessly, physically cutting the tape with razor blades because no one could get through a full vocal or guitar take without breaking down into tears or storming out of the room in a rage. The tape itself was literally wearing out, shedding its magnetic oxide from being played back so many thousands of times. The physical deterioration of the tape was a perfect mirror for the psychological deterioration of the band. And then there was the heartbreak of what they had to leave behind. Stevie Nicks wrote another masterpiece during these sessions, a sprawling, gorgeous, agonizing ballad called Silver Springs. It was her definitive statement on Lindsay, featuring the lyrics, "I'll follow you down till the sound of my voice will haunt you." It was brilliant. But when it came time to sequence the album, Lindsay and the rest of the band told her it was too long. Because of the physical time constraints of a vinyl record, they cut it. They took her soul-bearing masterpiece and threw it on the B-side of a single. To Stevie, it wasn't about vinyl constraints. It was the ultimate calculated act of revenge by Lindsay to keep her voice down. The resentment over Silver Springs would burn hot for another 20 years. But finally, by the early cold months of 1977, the album was done. They called it Rumors. It was a brilliant, incredibly fitting title suggested by John McVie because everywhere they went, people were talking about them. The press was whispering about who was sleeping with who was secretly leaving the band, and who was actively losing their mind. When the album was finally released to the public, the cultural impact was immediate and staggering. It did not just go to number one, it exploded like a cultural atom bomb. It became a global phenomenon. The radio played absolutely nothing else. You couldn't walk into a grocery store, drive down the highway, or go to a party without hearing it. It sold 1 million copies a month, then 2 million, then 10 million. It won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year.
Fleetwood Mac!
Well, the big ones always get shoved forward, so I'd like to take this opportunity in thanking everyone that's done such a lot for us.
It became the definitive soundtrack to endless summers, to late-night drives, and to millions of broken hearts across the entire world. The public was utterly, obsessively captivated. They weren't just buying a vinyl record, they were buying a front-row ticket to a real-time, high-stakes soap opera. The pain embedded in the grooves of the vinyl was palpable. When you listen to The Chain, the only song on the album officially credited to all 5 members, you could hear the desperate, thumping bass line holding together a fragile, frantic plea. Listen to the wind blow, watch the sunrise, running in the shadows, damn your love, damn your lies. It was a terrifyingly honest confession, broadcast to the entire world. It was the sound of a band holding on to each other for dear life while simultaneously trying to push each other off a cliff. But the staggering success brought a new, horrific kind of punishment because the album was so massively historically successful. They had to go on a massive world tour. They could not escape each other. They had to board private jets, sitting rows apart in stony, unyielding silence. They had to check into 5-star luxury hotels, demanding rooms on completely different floors to ensure they wouldn't accidentally run into each other in the hallway. And every single night, without fail, they had to walk out onto a stage in front of 50,000 screaming fans and perform their deepest trauma live under blinding hot spotlights. Imagine the absolute surreal, punishing nightmare of that existence. You are on stage in Madison Square Garden, the crowd is deafening, and you have to turn to the man who broke your heart, look him directly in the eyes, and sing a song about how much you despise him. And you have to do it with a smile. You have to harmonize flawlessly. You have to do it on Tuesday in New York, Thursday in Chicago, and Saturday in Los Angeles. For over a year, Lindsay would play his guitar solos with such aggressive, furious intensity, break the heavy strings, staring down Stevie as he shredded the frets, his face contorted in anger. Stevie would twirl in her black chiffon, banging her tambourine, channeling her grief into a wild, mystical performance, glaring right back at him. The audience thought it was incredible. Theatrical stage chemistry. They thought it was a brilliantly choreographed performance art piece. They didn't realize they were watching 2 people actively, genuinely bleed out on stage. They survived the tour, but the damage was permanent, etched into their bones. They had given absolutely everything to the music, leaving absolutely nothing for themselves. The tragic irony of Fleetwood Mac and the Rumors album is a profound, timeless lesson in the absolute cost of artistic immortality. They set out to make a great rock record to save their careers. What they actually created was a flawless, glittering, diamond-encrusted monument to human suffering. They perfectly captured the exact agonizing moment when love turns to ash. They bottled the feeling of total betrayal, of desperate longing, of foolish, lingering hope, and they made it sound like golden sunshine pouring through a California window. To this day, decades later, when those songs play on the radio, they do not sound old. They do not sound like dusty relics of 1977. They sound urgent. They sound dangerous. They sound relevant because the pain, the jealousy, and the heartbreak in those tracks is absolutely terrifyingly real. It is human emotion, stripped of all its polite fiction. In the end, the album they forged in that dark, windowless room in Sausalito would go on to sell over 40 million copies. It stands unshakable as one of the greatest, most enduring achievements in the history of recorded sound. But as the fading, beautiful echoes of those perfect harmonies drift away into the night, you are left with a haunting realization. To create the ultimate album about heartbreak, they had to break themselves beyond repair. The music survived the wreckage. The legend was secured for all of history. But the people who walked into that studio in 1976, the hopeful dreamers who just wanted to play the blues and sing their songs to the world, they never really came back out. They sacrificed their souls to the altar of the sound, and the ghost of that sacrifice will echo out of the speakers forever.